What's going on, guys, and welcome back to WrestleRant Ranks. The inaugural episode last week covered the top Raw theme songs in WWE history, and not only the best ones, too. We ranked every theme song in Monday Night Raw history before the big Netflix debut later that night. So for the second episode here today, I was kind of batting around different ideas, maybe Royal Rumble, centric themes and whatnot for the episode this week. And I settled upon this one. This is going to be a bit of a different format from what we did last week. Last week we did a tier list. S, A, B, C, D, don't know. This will be a little bit different. I'll probably use WrestleRant Ranks to do slideshows like this, lists, tier lists, and also the occasional quiz if I can name every intercontinental champion in history, stuff like that, without looking up the answers ahead of time. You can trust me on that. But I thought this week we would do something a little bit different and run down the top 10 greatest auras in NXT history. There's always a lot of romanticizing, and for the right reasons, mind you, about the black and gold period in NXT's history and how great it was for a lot of different superstars who are now finding success currently on Raw and SmackDown, some of which are now in AEW. A lot of former NXT champions are in AEW, and some of which no longer work for either company because they fizzled out before they ever made it to the main roster, and it just never really worked out. I'm a big NXT black and gold guy. I obviously not really grew up on that era, but I was in college by the time that NXT black and gold kind of came around. But I think back very fondly on those days of NXT on the network, even NXT on Hulu. But primarily, this is covering the entire history of NXT, not dating back to 2010, the competition show. No one really had an aura on NXT in 2010. We're not counting the Nexus here, okay? We're talking NXT circa 2014, 2015, 2016, all the way through present day. You will see some familiar faces on this list from the last couple of years, but it is all not modern talent, a lot of which, as you could probably tell from the thumbnail right here, will be talent from 10 years ago, 9 years ago, 8 years ago, and what I would define as the greatest star-studded, some of the greatest star-studded periods in NXT history. And when we say aura rather, like what exactly does that mean? That word gets overused a lot in wrestling. What exactly does aura mean? It's like that vibe that they give off. And I'm sure if you're watching this, you probably understand the definition of the word, especially if you're a wrestling fan. You've probably heard it a lot, along with cinema and stuff like that, obviously. But my definition is the exact same as everyone else's. When this person makes an entrance, wins a match, just the vibe they give off, they just sweat charisma, as Mr. Marceau and I would say about certain individuals on this list in the last 10 years. Just from the sheer entrance alone, from their introduction. And we're just talking NXT here. We're not talking their Raw presentation, their SmackDown presentation. And I'm sure there are names I left off either on purpose or accidentally. But we're going to run down what I think are the top 10 greatest auras in NXT history. So let's start with number 10, working our way to number 1 here. And you're probably going to get not mad at me for this one necessarily, but thinking, why the fuck would you include someone from the last couple of years here? But let's start with Braun Breaker, all right? Braun Breaker does have aura about him. Even now on Raw and SmackDown, with the WWE machine behind him, he's going to have a great aura about him for years to come, and it's only going to grow. But I remember when they first started NXT 2.0. First of all, it was a fucking dumpster fire. That show when it first started on NXT, or NXT first started on USA as NXT 2.0, back in September of 2021 it would have been. Not a lot of, certainty about the brand as far as what they were going for. A lot of people were fired from NXT or called up, and that was at a point when NXT's creative direction was pretty, in the doldrums, let's say. But Braun Breaker was one of the few people on that show that really immediately stuck out to me as having aura about him. From the moment that he was introduced, the only thing we really knew about him, which they weren't really even acknowledging at that point, was the fact that he was the son of Rick Steiner, the nephew of Scott Steiner, now two WWE Hall of Famers after Braun Breaker inducted them a few years back. I believe in 2022, actually. But Braun Breaker was on that first ever episode. Not only was he on that first ever episode of NXT 2.0, he faced LA Knight, actually, who would probably be an honorable mention on this list. LA Knight, to me, did not spend enough time in NXT. It was not enough of a featured player to get that aura about him. I mean, he did have aura, but not in the same way some of these other individuals did. But for Braun Breaker, he showed up in that first match, squashed LA Knight in 5 minutes, and made an immediate impact in his debut. Going on to win the NXT Championship within mere months. He got a shot the following month, actually, at Halloween Havoc. He fell short against Tommaso Ciampa. But by January, he was the NXT champion, lost it soon after to Dolph Ziggler, regained it over WrestleMania weekend and the post-WrestleMania Raw, and went on to hold that championship for a whole other year. And then obviously he was just called up to SmackDown about a year ago, right around Royal Rumble season. He won the NXT Tag Team titles as well with Baron Corbin. But especially early on, Braun Breaker, for a lot of people, was the heart and soul of NXT. Now, his mic skills for a long time and even up until today, but specifically while he was in NXT, left a lot to be desired. When he was the babyface dominant champion, his mic skills were not his strong suit. But going in there with his sheer athleticism, putting people down in mere minutes, whether it was an established name like LA Knight or any of the jobbers that were on NXT at that point in time, like a Zion Quinn or someone like that. Stop me if you don't remember those people like Zion Quinn and Boa and Rue Fenn and people like that from NXT. You probably have no idea who I'm talking about, but from the NXT 2.0 heyday. Braun Breaker just had that aura about him. Obviously paying off in the long run, becoming one of their biggest success stories in NXT 2.0, now finding himself on SmackDown, or rather on Raw. I mean, he was initially on SmackDown, but he got moved to Raw about a year ago and is now the Intercontinental Champion 2-time. So he's number 10 on my list. Number 9 on my list is Sasha Banks. We're going back a bit here. The first female entry on the list is the boss herself. Now, I haven't exactly been overly high on the presentation and really just a lot of the work that Mercedes Moné has done in AEW. A little bit of the in-ring stuff, like the Britt Baker match wasn't great. The second Hikaru Shida match at All Out, I want to say, was also not great. Chris Statlander and people like that in the last couple of recent months, or Kurashida, the first one, and some other matches she's had, Willow Nightingale as well. But in NXT, and she's, overall kind of working on finding her footing in AEW. She's a relatively new face there. Obviously, she's not new to the world of wrestling whatsoever. But in NXT was really where she got her start as the boss. And I remember when I first started watching NXT, she started out as a jobber, just another enhancement talent. That there really wasn't anything out of the ordinary about her. She was a perfectly serviceable wrestler, but as a character, she was just another average Jane on the NXT roster. But it really wasn't until she linked up with initially Summer Rae and as well as Charlotte Flair. I think they were all a little group for a little while there in late 2013, early 2014. But that heel turn allowed her to kind of branch off on her own, get away from Charlotte. I think if it was the group that I'm thinking of, but Summer Rae as well, kind of go off on her own and become the boss that we know of today. Now, obviously, now in AEW, she's the CEO, but in NXT, she was the boss, and that's where the persona really kind of grew a life of its own. And she was just a massive star. I remember when she walked out for that Our Evolution match, December 2014, just over 10 years ago. God, we're getting fucking old. She walked out for that match with Charlotte Flair for the NXT Women's Championship. She challenged for the championship on that night. She was unsuccessful, but her entrance alone, and specifically when they gave her the new music around that time as well, really made me kind of open my eyes to the idea that this woman has a lot of potential to be very, very good in a staple of that women's division, a staple rather of that women's division. Easy for me to say, for years to come. And that's exactly what happened. She went on to win the NXT Women's Championship a couple of months later at the Fatal 4-Way show, or not the Fatal 4-Way show. It was the not Our Evolution. What was the one? Rival. Takeover Rival in February of 2015. Winning the championship in a Fatal 4-Way, having great matches with Charlotte on TV, Becky Lynch on TV. Bayley is who she ultimately lost the championship to a little bit later on that summer, in one of the greatest NXT matches of all time. We could do a lot of NXT lists here on the channel with the amount of moments and memories that have come out of that brain just because I'm an NXT mark. But Sasha Banks was quickly then moved up to the main roster. They really couldn't wait any longer. Even while she was the NXT champion, the NXT Women's Champion, she got moved to the Raw roster in the summer of 2015. And it did take her some time to kind of break out on her own. She was put in Team Bad, and she was still great, but she wasn't really being showcased as the star that we knew her as until 2016 when she won the Women's Championship and became a featured face on Raw and later SmackDown as well. But got to give a shout out to Sasha Banks. She was a pioneer in the early days of that NXT Women's Division, and she deserves a lot of credit for helping put that NXT Women's Division on the map and helping translate that success of women's wrestling in NXT to the main roster a little bit later on. Number 8 on my list is another female, Julia. Now we go from Sasha Banks from a decade ago. Decade later, we now have Julia. The NXT Women's Division has evolved a lot in the last 10 years. I don't want to say for better or for worse, but in the sense that there's been a lot of highlights and a lot of low points. there were several points where the main roster just completely just depleted the NXT women's division and took a lot of those women for Raw and SmackDown, which boosted the women's ranks on Raw and SmackDown, but it left NXT without a whole lot of stars. But in the last year or two, NXT has done a great job of rehabbing that women's division with stars of, a lot of different, from a lot of different backgrounds. But specifically lately, we've had Julia come in, Stephanie Vakir, Zarya, Jordan Grace is probably on her way in, although she could report to the main roster instead immediately. But Julia was the first of the bunch. We first heard of her arrival well over a year ago when there were reports going around. When they first brought back Kairi Sane, there were internal discussions of maybe Julia could be next. And quite honestly, I didn't really know a whole lot about her. I've heard the name before. I'd heard she had a great presentation and aura about her. And my question was if WWE could capitalize on that with the presentation that they have to their advantage. Because, WWE has great matches and some great promos and storytelling, but one thing that they excel at more than any other promotion is the presentation. Could they capitalize on that with a woman like Julia? And it became clear from the moment they introduced her. I mean, technically, we first saw her in the crowd at the NXT Stand and Deliver show over WrestleMania weekend in 2024. But she eventually debuted definitively, officially, at the NXT No Mercy show last September. And again, making an immediate impression on the audience as someone for us to keep an eye out for. Now, she lost to Roxanne Perez in the CW debut and failed to become the NXT Women's Champion on that show, but she did just win the championship less than a week ago as we record this right now at the NXT New Year's Evil show, and the Julia era of NXT has officially begun. Just, again, the entrance alone is incredible, but it's not just the entrance. Just her presentation and just, I hate to keep going back to the word, but it's in the title of the video, the aura that she gives off in the ring. Now, her matches so far have been very good. From what I understand, they haven't quite reached the heights of what she was doing in Japan. Not in Stardom, but Mary Gold and promotions like that before coming to WWE. They haven't quite, hit that stride. She hasn't quite hit that stride that she was on before signing with NXT. But the entrance alone has gotten her over. The NXT faithful love her. The main roster crowds. When I say the main roster crowds, I'm talking about like the bigger arenas that they've put on shows for in the last couple of months. They all love her at Deadline, the New Year's Evil show, and all the live crowds that they've appeared in front of. She has gotten over instantly as a fan favorite with the NXT faithful. And I think she has a very bright future in NXT. Assuming they can keep her there for very long, she's currently the linchpin of that division, now as the new NXT Women's Champion. But the question is, how quickly will they fast track her to Raw or SmackDown, knowing what she's capable of? Moving on to 7, we got Keith Lee. Keith Lee would just walk out, specifically after they gave him the new music. And you know exactly what song I'm talking about. He had a handful of songs in WWE, specifically in NXT as well. He debuted with some, regular generic music. But around March of 2019, during his mini feud, actually, his mini series of matches with Donovan Dijak, they debuted new music for him that he sung himself, the lyrics. And everyone immediately was like, well, holy shit, like, this is a great song. And that wasn't like the turning point when people really started to recognize how great Keith Lee was. But that was when he kind of started, he himself, seemingly from my perspective anyway, started to put all the pieces together as someone that could really be a top star for that show. Because when he came in, I mean, he already had a lot of buzz from the independent scene. I was first introduced to Keith Lee's work when he was teaming with Shane Taylor, actually, in Ring of Honor 10 years ago. And they were an amazing team. I'm glad they kind of tapped back into that in Ring of Honor just about a year or so ago. He was really, really good in that tag team. But then he was doing his own thing in Evolve and in Progress and companies like that before WWE signed him in 2018. And there was some buzz about him when he first showed up. He looked like a star. We know what he could do in the ring. But WWE, or rather NXT, where he was, they weren't really doing anything with him for a while. He was just kind of meandering around, having regular squash matches, no real direction, wasn't chasing championships. But that series of matches with Donovan Dijak, who was a great star in his own right, by the way, really put both of them, but specifically Keith Lee, on the map. And it was soon after that where he was chasing championships, going on to win the NXT North American Championship in January of 2020. But even well before that, in the final few months of 2019, he was really building steam. He was gone for a little bit, and then he came back. But then when he did come back, I think he got hurt or something. But then when he came back in the latter half of 2019, he was in the War Games match. He was in the NXT representation match at Survivor Series representing NXT, bleeding black and gold, having an amazing showing on that show, being the last one eliminated by Roman Reigns, and then going on to win with his team at War Games the next night. and then also winning the NXT North American Championship in January of 2020. And then a little bit later on in that year, remaining undefeated one-on-one and winning the NXT Championship from Adam Cole, who had been champion for well over a year, and becoming the first and only person to win both the NXT Championship and the NXT Championship, or NXT North American Championship, holding both belts at the same time. And that was in front of no fans, and they, at that point, Keith Lee had been in WWE for about 2 years, so he was due for a main roster call-up, but the timing of it was awful. They ruined both of those runs. He had to vacate the North American Championship, of which he had held for like 6 months. He lost the NXT Championship in a month to Karrion Kross, who also got hurt, actually. I would probably put him on the honorable mentions list of greatest auras in NXT history, by the way, initially when he first arrived in NXT. But yeah, Keith Lee quickly fast-tracked to Raw and SmackDown upon becoming NXT champion. They ruined him. The fucking dress that he was wearing, the awful music they gave him. They never gave him the old song back. He was allowed to re-record new music that he sang, and it was an improvement over the initial song they gave him on Raw, but it still wasn't great. And then obviously he got sick. That whole thing was well documented. He did come back from that, and then he got fired anyway in late 2021. And his AEW run, a lot of which has been marred by health issues, but even when he was healthy, they really weren't doing shit with him. Maybe because of the health issues, we really don't know the complete story there. But what I do know is that the peak of this man's career was in NXT, and not only just from a booking standpoint, just when he wasn't having, health issues. I think COVID really messed it up for him. It messed up a lot of his momentum because I think he's still having lingering effects from that all these years later. But when he was in NXT having these great matches and amazing entrances with people singing along with the song, Bask in His Glory, that was the man's mantra, bask in his glory. And these people, it was impossible to boo the man. He was never booked as a heel, but it was impossible to boo him because he just had that great likable factor about him. He was great in the ring. He had that, certain promo style that not everyone's been on board with. On WWE main roster television, they were giving him shit to say that just sounded completely fucking ridiculous. But in NXT, less was more, didn't speak a whole lot, and he was booked very strong, and he just had that, man, this is a vibe of a guy that could really be something at some point in WWE. And obviously they fucked up, and then he went to AEW, and they kind of dropped the ball with him as well. And not that he's been his own worst enemy, but there have been shit that hasn't been the blame of either company in the sense that he's had health issues, and hopefully he can recover from that. We're pulling for him. He hasn't been on TV in AEW since late 2023. He wasn't on TV at all in 2024. Actually, the only appearance he made for wrestling television in 2024 was at the Hall of Fame for WWE. He made more appearances last year on air for WWE than he did for AEW. But hopefully at some point, regardless of the company, he is back and healthy and back in full form, and he can recapture some of the same magic he had in NXT, if possible, from a couple of years ago. Moving on to number 6, the entire Undisputed era. I mean, I can't tell you how many NXT shows, TV tapings, takeovers I went to from 2017 through 2019 that I was there for, that these men were on the card, specifically after they included Roderick Strong. It was a great group from the get-go. Bobby Fish, who I saw a recent video of, and I don't know what the fuck happened there. Bobby Fish, Kyle O'Reilly, Adam Cole, having that Ring of Honor connection, because obviously Red Dragon was already a thing in Ring of Honor. Kyle O'Reilly and Adam Cole were already a thing in Ring of Honor, as well as rivals. And then they threw in another Ring of Honor alum in Roderick Strong. They never once mentioned the words Ring of Honor on NXT television, but it was all very much implied because that was the same audience that WWE was tapping into as the Ring of Honor audience, as well as its talent pool, clearly. But just their debut, I mean, their debut was amazing at the NXT TakeOver show in August of 2017 in Brooklyn. Adam Cole laying out the new NXT champion, Drew McIntyre. Now, he did not beat Drew for that belt. Plans may have changed. I don't know what happened there, but Andrade was the one who beat Drew for the belt, and Cole did not become NXT champion for another 2 years after that, until the summer of 2019. Actually, my birthday weekend, TakeOver 25, right here in Connecticut, he beat Johnny Gargano in one of the greatest NXT matches of all time. Their first match may have been better. I mean, it's been heavily debated since then. The second match, all their matches were overbooked, but specifically the first two. And their second match was amazing. But there was a point in time in late 2019 where all members held gold. I mean, there were a couple different points when this guy was hurt, that guy was hurt. Bobby Fish was hurt quite a bit. He was on the older side compared to the rest of them. But Fish and O'Reilly had the tag team titles. Roderick Strong was the North American champion. Adam Cole was the NXT champion for an entire fucking year, like I mentioned during the Keith Lee side, in the aforementioned Keith Lee slide. Adam Cole was amazingly booked in NXT, which is what made it that much funnier when it came time for his contract to expire. He said, "Peace, guys. I'm headed to AEW." Not only because I know my friends are there, but because I know I'm going to be treated better, booked better. That was when Vince was at his worst. They were firing a whole bunch of people from NXT and the main roster. Honestly, I doubt if he re-signed to WWE at that point, I doubt he would still be here today. I honestly expect had he re-signed to WWE in late 2021, they would have fired him anyway by early 2022. I mean, look at Karrion Kross. He got called up, and within months, he was fired. Keith Lee, he was fired. Swerve Strickland, the Isaiah Swerve Scott at that point, he was fired. Adam Cole probably would have been no different, especially if they made him his manager, made him a manager for someone like a Keith Lee. Bearcat Keith Lee, as had been rumored at that point. But Undisputed Era just had amazing chemistry. It does make me sad that they were never able to quite capture that magic that I thought they could. Having AEW, I mean, Bobby Fish fell off the face of the fucking earth, so that's completely off the table. He's in MLW now, but he looks fucking terrible. The other three are now back together in AEW, but it's just not the same. It's not the same, and had they done it a couple of years ago, Roddy came in a little bit later on, I get that, but they still could have done something cool together, and they just, so far, have not. They won the Undisputed Kingdom route and all this other shit, and it just hasn't been the same. Their booking has been abysmal, to say the least. But in NXT, when the NXT brand revolved around Undisputed Era, and they were there for X amount of years, they were a group for like 3.5 years, probably even more than that, before Adam Cole turned his back on O'Reilly, and then Strong had to go his own way, form the Diamond Mine. Bobby Fish got fired soon after. O'Reilly left. Cole left. Within months, Undisputed Era, as we knew it, was completely deassembled, not only on the brand, but like from the company itself. They were gone. But they had so many great matches, so many great feuds and moments as baby faces, but definitely as heels in their time together. And every time you heard that shock the system hit the intercom, it was like, all right, we know we're in for a great match, and we know we're in for something special. Adam Cole's, I was going to say sole in-ring appearance on the main roster. That's not true. But I was there for one of them at the Royal Rumble in 2018 when he came in as a surprise entry from NXT. He was not the NXT champion. This was within months of him debuting, by the way. Got a great reaction. He did go on to appear on Raw and SmackDown as part of the build for Survivor Series in 2019. He also looked like a star at that point. He would not have gotten that same treatment had he got called up in late 2021, so he made the right choice in that respect. Number 5 here on the list, we get to Aleister Black, a.k.a. Malachi Black, who's been in the news quite a bit lately, as someone that I think we all expect to be back in WWE in due time. His entrance, I was there for. I was at a lot of NXT shows from 2015 through 2019 specifically. I went to a lot of NXT takeovers, and Malachi Black was on a lot of those shows. When he debuted on the WrestleMania Weekend Takeover Orlando in 2017, I wasn't really sure what to expect. I knew he had signed with the company. I forgot what his name was pre-WWE. Wasn't it? It wasn't Malachi. It was Tommy End. Tommy End was his name. Because I think his real name is Tommy. Obviously, his real last name is not End, but Tommy End. So he did debut at an NXT UK special. I think it was the United Kingdom tournament in early 2017 as a surprise opponent for Pac, aka formerly known as Neville in WWE. And he got a great reaction because obviously they knew who he was. So I was a little bit familiar with him by that point. And then vignettes started to hype his rival for TakeOver Orlando. I think he beat. Who did he beat in his debut? That's a nice trivia question. I don't remember, but it was a quick squash. It might have been Elias. I don't remember, but it was someone like that. And he had a quick arrival, and immediately from the entrance alone, everyone thought this guy's fucking badass. The music was amazing by CFOs. The rise up like he was coming in from a fucking casket. The WWE did recreate on the main roster, but they added in the creaking noise, and that sucked. He had some success on the main roster, never won any championships or anything like that. But he did, he was booked decently enough. For a little while, he went undefeated, and they had him do the whole room thing, and they just completely fucking ruined him to a point where by the time they fired him in 2021, not that he had no value, they had just turned him heel, and that had potential. But he was far from the star that he was in NXT years earlier. From 2017 to 2019, this man was a big part of a lot of people's enjoyment in watching NXT. Going undefeated all 2017 long, later winning the NXT Championship in early 2018, dropping the belt to Tommaso Ciampa in the summer of 2018. But he was a great babyface, great feuds with a whole lot of different people. Kenta, they had an underrated gem at TakeOver Brooklyn 3. Him and Andrade had a lot of good matches. Him and Adam Cole had a lot of good matches, including in TakeOver Philadelphia at that point, early 2018. Johnny Gargano, they worked well together. Ciampa, I mentioned. Velveteen Dream, I mean, we don't really say that name anymore, and honestly, I mean, putting his personal shit aside, would probably also be on this list as an honorable mention. Velveteen Dream also had a bit of an aura about him early on that made him feel like a star that would have been even bigger on the main roster. And obviously, he fucked that up for himself. But Malachi Black, or Aleister Black at the time, was a very big part of NXT's, specialness and buzz, and he was booked very well. But the entrance alone, and even when he got in the ring, he did not speak for like the first 9 months or whatever of his arrival. He debuted in April, did not speak a single word until the Velveteen Dream match in November of 2017, when he said, I think he said, "Say my name" or something, and then he got on the mic and said Velveteen Dream, or whatever it was. It was amazing storytelling. Simple storytelling, but it worked. And I thought those guys had great chemistry too. But yeah, I miss this Aleister Black. We were gonna we almost got it in AEW when he debuted as a heel in 2021, and they booked him well from the get go in the feud with Cody Rhodes and all that other sort of shit. But then it just didn't really go anywhere, and he fell off the face of the earth. So hopefully at some point we can get this Aleister Black back, Malachi Black back, regardless of the company, probably WWE. Let's be honest, but it might take some time to get there. Number 4, Bobby Roode. Now, Bobby Roode's an interesting one because, unlike a lot of the people on this list, he no longer currently wrestles, and that's a health issue. He broke his neck a couple of years ago. With Triple H in charge of the main roster, would he now be if he didn't break his neck? And the thing is, Bobby Roode has never wrestled in Triple H's WWE. Triple H took over creative. I know Vince came in and out a few different times in the last 2 years, 2.5 years. But would Bobby Roode have been pushed better with Triple H in charge? Probably not, honestly. I feel like it was more of a timing issue. He's on the older side now anyway. He might be pushing 50. He came in on the older side anyway in NXT almost a decade ago. He must, if he's not 50 now, he's close to 50. I've always been a big Bobby Roode fan. The Bobby Roode that we got in NXT was not quite the same Bobby Roode that we had in TNA, but different completely genre of music that he used. But the Glorious theme alone, for as weird as it was when I first heard it and I wasn't exactly sold, when I saw it in person a couple of weeks later at that TakeOver show in Brooklyn, TakeOver Brooklyn 2, when he beat, again, another trivia note for you, I don't remember who he beat on that show. It might have been, I don't think it was Kenta. I think Kenta returned on that show to attack Austin Aries. Don't know who he faced. I don't really remember. I'd have to go back and check. My memory is foggy at this point when it comes to shit like that. But it wasn't even really about the match. It was more about Bobby Roode. The amazing entrance that he had, the whole Glorious thing, it got over in one fucking night. People were singing that song. And can you argue the song was more over than the guy was? Yeah, absolutely. But he went on to have a great run as NXT champion. His mic skills held up. He had some really good matches with Shinsuke Nakamura. Kenta he had a good match with. Drew McIntyre. The matches were good. They were much better matches on NXT at that point. But he just screamed fucking star. Like, this was a guy that should have been a main event heel on Raw or SmackDown from the moment he signed to the company in 2016. Thank God Triple H got him first, because had he just gone straight to the main roster, Vince McMahon would have completely fucked this guy over. He did fuck him over on the main roster anyway a couple of years later when he did call him up in late 2017. He was only in NXT for about a year. He debuted over SummerSlam weekend, and he left NXT in SummerSlam weekend in 2017. And he won the United States Championship and a couple tag titles with Dolph Ziggler, so he wasn't a total flop on the main roster. But he should have been a much bigger star than he was. After the success he had on his own in NXT, specifically as a heel, he was never a babyface in NXT, except they brought him up to the main roster as a babyface because people loved the music. But when he would come out specifically from that pedestal, TakeOver 3 or whatever, TakeOver Brooklyn 2 rather, in 2017, oh my God, it was like a god descending from the heavens. Miss me some Bobby Roode. Number 3, Asuka. Asuka was someone that I knew nothing about. I saw her in the crowd as Kana at the TakeOver Brooklyn 1 show in August of 2015. I was at that show. She was one of the first people they showed in the audience. Like, oh yeah, we're going to sign him, blah, blah, blah. They signed her. They had just signed her at that point, renamed her Asuka. She had her first match. I think she was already on NXT TV before she had her first match. I think she signed her contract in the ring with William Regal. Her first match was a TakeOver Respect against Dana Brooke. And I have no notes, by the way. I just remember this all from memory, as you could tell. Otherwise, I would remember some of the names of the people I forgot. But Asuka's match against Dana Brooke, that sounds like a standard squash on paper. First of all, it was probably Dana Brooke's best match of her entire fucking career. Second of all, Asuka's entrance, again, she came out with the cool mask. She'd have the robe like you see in that image. And she was booked as such a dominant force for so long. The NXT women's division has not quite seen, I mean, we have seen stars of her caliber since then. But what I meant to say was we hadn't seen anyone quite like her in NXT up to that point. The four horsewomen were amazing. They all had aura in their own respect. Sasha more than everyone else, in my opinion. But Asuka just specifically, I don't know if it was like what it was, whether it was like the Asian flavor that she brought to NXT, the in-ring ability, I think was probably stronger than any women they had employed up to that point in that division. Paige was great, loved Emma. The four horsewomen were all great. Asuka in the ring is probably better than all four of them. Even Sasha, honestly, especially at that point in time when Asuka first came into the company. And I feel like from the moment she arrived, it was a guarantee she would do well in NXT's, in Triple H's NXT specifically. And she did. She won the NXT Women's Championship the subsequent April from Bayley in a great match over WrestleMania weekend. Had another rematch with her over TakeOver Brooklyn 2 weekend. That was really good as well. And she was champion for like a year and a half. Still the longest reign in NXT Women's Championship history. I think Shayna Baszler's had the championship for more combined days. Roxanne Perez is probably up there as well, but Asuka for a single run, I don't think anyone has yet to beat that run. Shayna Baszler came close. I think Asuka still has her beat. She held that championship from April of 2016 through like fucking September of 2017. She was champion for a very, very long time. And she was the cornerstone of that division to a point where they kind of put her above everyone else, including Ember Moon, who I would also give an honorable mention to. When she first came in, she had that mystique and charisma about her, that enigma, so to speak. And she was great, but, you know, she did win the championship, but it was a little too late, I would say. For Asuka, she just, that thankfully did translate to Raw and SmackDown. Asuka's been one of the best booked overall women's stars WWE's ever had. Multi-time Raw Women's Champion, SmackDown Women's Champion. WrestleMania, not main events, but WrestleMania. She finally won a WrestleMania recently. She lost a lot of WrestleMania. Tag team titles. She won the Money in the Bank ladder match, Elimination Chamber matches, Royal Rumble. A lot of different accolades for Asuka. Mixed match challenges. She's pretty much done it all aside from now winning the mid-card championships they just introduced. And I hope she's back soon to chase one of those championships in either brand. Forming groups with Damage Control and stuff like that. She's pretty much done it all in WWE, but it all started with NXT and how Triple H presented her from the get-go. Thankfully, Vince was sane enough to see that and book her well. There have been points where she was booked terribly, but overall, she's had an amazing run that all started in NXT and her aura on that brand. Number 2, and I promise we're winding down here as we approach or surpass the 30-minute mark. Number 2, Finn Balor. Finn Balor, to me, when you think of NXT, I think Finn Balor is one of the first people you think of. And not only just for the return run that he had a couple of years ago, going back to NXT, winning the NXT championship for a second time, really rejuvenating his career and really refreshing his run as far as what people knew he was capable of that we were not seeing on Raw and SmackDown for several years when he went back there in 2019. He was in NXT for like a fucking year and a half. He was back there for almost 2 years. His return run lasted a lot longer than people thought. He was there for the entire COVID period. He got there before COVID, but he came back after COVID. Not was over, but like when we got crowds back in mid-2021. But I'm specifically talking his first run there. Finn Balor, coming from New Japan Pro Wrestling as Prince Devitt, was known for the body paint, and no one was really sure if they'd be able to use that in WWE. Now, obviously, he didn't use copyrighted characters like Venom and stuff like that, or the Joker, but he put his own twist on it. And after a while, the demon stuff, for as amazing as it was, I'll never forget what I thought when he first came in, thinking, holy fuck, this guy's a star. When he first arrived, he had that aura about him, but as the demon specifically is what lands him the number 2 spot. It was just incredible. And they used it for all the takeovers. That's the funny thing. We haven't seen it a whole lot in recent years because he turned heel, did the Judgment Day thing. I get it. And the few times they have done the demon thing in recent years, they fucking ruined it. The Roman Reigns match wasn't great. And the Edge match I didn't love. And he fucking lost that too. So as the demon, he felt unstoppable. And a lot of the times the demon looked exactly the same. The only variation I really remember him doing on the demon in NXT was when he was the demon for the London show. the Takeover London show of December 2015. He was like Jack the Ripper demon on that show. Beyond that, he was pretty much the same demon in every takeover, but people popped for it every time. Every time he would throw his hands in the air. In NXT, I saw that thinking, well, that's going to be a big hit on the main roster. And sure enough, it was. When he first arrived, he was a big star. He got hurt. That kind of ruined his momentum. They never really booked him quite the same after that when he came back from injury in 2017. But in NXT, he was the face of that show for a very long time. Kevin Owens had aura about him as well. He took that, that torch from Kevin Owens and the title in mid 2015, becoming NXT champion. And he had a really long run with it. We've seen longer runs since then, but his run was very, very long as the NXT champion from the summer all the way through April, which I was there for when he lost the championship of 2016 to Samoa Joe. And he was a guy that a lot of people thought that should have been a main eventer in WWE on the main roster. And again, he was initially before they kind of lost their way with him. But in NXT, he was just incredible. The Finn Balor, his second run was very good too, specifically as a heel. But that first run really, there was something special about it during the most special period in NXT's history. And then we get to number one. You probably already know who it is, Shinsuke Nakamura. And he is someone, when you talk about aura, when someone shows up, it's hard to put into words how special this was when he made his debut at the TakeOver Dallas show in April of 2016. A lot of the people I just mentioned in this list, all the aforementioned superstars, had aura when they first debuted. But no one blew me away quite like Shinsuke Nakamura, whose matches I had seen previously from like watching Ring of Honor television. I didn't watch a whole lot of New Japan, but I had seen some New Japan matches he was involved in, some Ring of Honor matches he was involved in, so I wasn't completely unfamiliar with him. But they had broke the news he was coming in alongside AJ Styles and Gallows and Anderson, but instead of putting him on the main roster, which would have been cool, but I think it was a lot smarter to do what they did instead by putting him in NXT first, allow AJ to go to the main roster, Gallows and Anderson went to the main roster. Nakamura went to NXT, and he debuted at a TakeOver against Sami Zayn, still one of the best NXT matches in NXT history. And he came in, the entrance was probably even better than the match. We all saw that entrance, and still one of the greatest entrances, like not even like his entrance in general, but like that night's entrance specifically. Even just the way he moved his body, like it's kind of hard to describe it, like the way he contorted his body with the movement of the song, that was just, it was immaculate. I mean, they really just nailed that presentation from the get-go. It was not a shock that he won the NXT championship within months. And again, he was on that show for quite some time. Nakamura was not quite some time. There were some people that were on NXT a lot longer than he was. He was only in NXT because it was going to be difficult to keep him in NXT for that long, just considering how big of a star he was, and people really wanted to see that act on the main roster. And when it did happen in 2017, he was very over from the get-go because people already knew how great he was. And they never really made him the main event star that he could have been. Nowadays, those days are over. And he's had a lot of success as a mid-card champion and tag team champion, but like Bobby Roode, I think he could have been a lot more than that on the main roster. And I mean, he won the Royal Rumble, so it's not like he wasn't pushed in big matches at Mania, like he faced AJ Styles, and he's won King of the Ring and done all this other shit. But he could have done more, is my point. In NXT, I think kind of proved that. You can argue he was a big fish in a small pond, but the entrance was just hypnotizing. His matches were very good with Samoa Joe, Sami Zayn, Austin Aries, Bobby Roode, among all the other matches he had on television leading up to his NXT exit in early 2017. And he, to me, may not necessarily be the greatest superstar in NXT history. There's a whole other list that could be dedicated to that. But to me, the greatest aura in NXT history, the greatest entrance in NXT history, belongs to this man, the King of Strong Style, Shinsuke Nakamura. So I know this was a lengthy video. I'm still working on the format of these things. Hopefully I can stop talking and talk a lot less or do smaller lists in the future. Not every video will be nearly 40 minutes long, but I just wanted to kind of do an expansive list of something I thought would be a cool idea to do. And I've written down other lists and ideas and other tier lists that are on tierlistmaker.com, I think it is. That was what we did last week, and I'll probably go back to that next week with Rumble-related stuff and John Cena-related stuff and whatnot. So keep an eye out for that. But I'm curious what you guys think. Who has the greatest aura in NXT history, or just a few of the names, and maybe not necessarily a number one, but give me a top 3, top 5 if you have them. If you're watching and still watching, I applaud you and I appreciate it. Thank you so much. But we're still, like I said, Still trying to play around with the concept and the format of the show. We'll see what form it takes in the future. But for now, I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe if you haven't already. We do a lot more videos like this every single day here on the channel, including live streams on Tuesday, Thursday, and on Saturday. Until next time, folks, I'm Graham G. Matthews. Have an awesome rest of your week, and I'll catch your ass down the road.